Be me, Margaret, 34, Human Resources Manager. Been in this position for 3 years now. Finally have the power to make real change in this male-dominated hellscape. My mission is clear. Dismantle the patriarchal structures that have oppressed women for centuries. Every day, I come to work knowing I'm fighting the good fight. These engineers think they can just do whatever they want because they're technical, not on my watch. Typical Monday morning, reviewing the employee handbook again. Need to add more inclusive language sections. Also working on mandatory bias training for all male employees. Honestly thinking we should make it quarterly instead of annual. Men just don't retain this information like women do. Walk past the break room and hear laughter. Always suspicious when groups of men are laughing. Usually means someone's being problematic. Decide to grab coffee and observe the dynamic. See David, 58, senior engineer, talking with a few younger guys. This guy has been here for over 2 decades. Classic example of how mediocre men get promoted through old boys networks. Sure, his performance reviews are excellent, but who writes those reviews? Other men, obviously. The whole system is rigged. As I'm pouring my oat milk latte, I hear David say something about coffee. I like my coffee like I like my debugging. Thorough and methodical. The other guys chuckle. My blood immediately runs cold. This is exactly the kind of coded language these men use. They think they're being clever, but I see right through it. Spend the rest of the day researching case law on hostile work environments. This joke is clearly establishing a pattern of exclusionary behavior. When men make these seemingly innocent comments, they're actually reinforcing workplace hierarchies. It's about power dynamics and making women feel unwelcome. Doesn't matter that no women were present. The impact extends beyond the immediate audience. Draft email to my supervisor explaining the situation. I've identified a concerning incident involving potential harassment disguised as humor. David's comment about coffee preferences contained problematic undertones. We need to address this immediately before it escalates. As guardians of workplace culture, we cannot allow these microaggressions. Send it off and feel satisfied that I'm protecting vulnerable employees. Next morning, called into meeting with Vice President of Operations. Explain the severity of the situation. Look, Margaret, it sounds like David was just making small talk about coffee. This is exactly the problem, I explain patiently. You're dismissing the psychological impact of these seemingly harmless interactions. David's comment reinforces masculine-coded technical language that excludes non-male perspectives. We have a duty to create an inclusive environment. Vice President looks confused but doesn't push back. Men rarely understand these nuances. That's why companies need strong, female voices in leadership. Schedule formal investigation meeting with David. Spend hours preparing documentation. Research company policies on workplace conduct. Draft comprehensive report on hostile environment indicators. Bring David in for disciplinary hearing. He looks genuinely confused when I explain the allegations. Margaret, I was just talking about my morning routine with debugging code. The specificity of your language choices suggests underlying biases. I'm going to need you to explain why you felt comfortable making assumptions about coffee preferences. I was talking about my own coffee preferences. David, let's focus on the impact rather than intent. He tries to explain that debugging is a technical term. Classic mansplaining behavior. I understand you think your technical background gives you authority here, but I'm trying to help you understand how your words affect others. Even when no women were present, these comments contribute to systemic exclusion. Document his defensive responses as evidence of deeper problems. Interview the other employees who were present. They all claim the comment was innocent. Obvious example of male solidarity protecting each other. Marcus, you need to consider why you're minimizing this incident. Margaret, David was literally just talking about coffee and work processes. That's your interpretation, but impact matters more than intent. We need to examine why you feel comfortable dismissing potential harassment. Compile final investigation report, 47 pages documenting the incident and broader patterns. Include analysis of how seemingly neutral language perpetuates discrimination. Recommend immediate termination for David. Failure to address this incident sends message that harassment is acceptable. David's long tenure cannot shield him from accountability. We must prioritize psychological safety over individual employment. Present findings to senior leadership team. Some pushback from old school executives. Margaret, don't you think termination is extreme for a coffee comment? This is exactly why these problems persist in our industry. We're either committed to inclusive workplace culture or we're not. Half measures enable continued discrimination, eventually get approval for termination. Call David into final meeting. After thorough investigation, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. Your comment violated our workplace conduct policy. Additionally, your defensive responses during investigation demonstrate lack of cultural alignment. He looks absolutely shocked. Margaret, I've been here 23 years. I was talking about coffee and debugging. Your inability to acknowledge the problematic nature of your behavior proves this decision is correct. Hand him termination paperwork and escort him out. Feel accomplished knowing I've sent clear message. Other male employees need to understand there are consequences. Post. On company Slack about commitment to inclusive culture, leadership took swift action to address recent workplace conduct issues. We will not tolerate behavior that undermines our values. Several female employees react with thumbs up. A few weeks later, receive legal paperwork. David filed wrongful termination lawsuit, asking for $4.7 million in damages. Includes claims of age discrimination, gender bias, wrongful termination. Absolutely ridiculous. This is exactly how the patriarchy fights back when women assert authority. Schedule meeting with company lawyers. Legal team seems nervous about the case. Margaret, can you walk us through your documentation process? Show them my comprehensive investigation file. Did David receive progressive discipline before termination? The severity of the incident warranted immediate action. Progressive discipline enables continued problematic behavior. Lawyers exchange worried glances. Margaret, several witnesses say David was discussing debugging methodology. Witness testimony often reflects unconscious bias. My training in workplace dynamics allows me to identify subtle discrimination. We cannot rely on bystander accounts to determine harassment. Provide them with research on microaggressions and coded language. Lawyers look increasingly uncomfortable. Months of depositions and discovery. David's attorney keeps asking about my decision-making process. Ms. Margaret, how did you determine this coffee comment was harassment? My expertise in workplace culture allows me to recognize harmful patterns. The specific language choices revealed underlying biases. Impact on workplace environment supersedes individual intent. Stand firm in my testimony. Opposing counsel presents employee surveys about workplace culture. 94% of employees rated environment as positive and inclusive. This data is irrelevant to the specific incident. Employees often don't recognize microaggressions due to normalization. My role involves identifying problems others might miss. They show David's performance reviews, 23 years of excellent ratings. Performance reviews reflect systemic bias toward male employees. Company lawyers suggest settlement discussions. Absolutely not. Settling sends message that discrimination claims have merit. David's lawsuit is an attempt to silence feminist leadership. We need to fight this to protect other women in similar positions. Lawyers explain potential costs and risks. Sometimes principle matters more than money. Discovery phase reveals my email communications. Opposing attorney reads my messages about dismantling patriarchal structures. These emails demonstrate clear gender-based bias against male employees. My advocacy for workplace equality is not bias. Fighting discrimination requires identifying problematic behaviors. They quote my message, finally have power to make real change in this male-dominated hellscape. This language shows discriminatory intent. Trial begins and David's attorney presents timeline. Shows his 23-year employment history with 0 incidents. Highlights his mentorship of female engineers. Presents character witnesses including women he supervised. Ms. Margaret, you terminated a 58-year-old man for discussing coffee and debugging. I terminated an employee whose behavior violated workplace conduct standards. The debugging explanation is post hoc rationalization. Jury looks skeptical during my testimony. Explain how coded language perpetuates discrimination. Describe impact of seemingly innocent comments on workplace culture. Even unintentional harassment creates hostile environment. My training allows me to identify these subtle forms of discrimination. David's attorney asks about my specific qualifications. Describe my human resources certification and workplace diversity training. Company president testifies about financial impact. David was lead engineer on 3 major projects. His termination delayed client deliverables by months. Cost company significant revenue and reputation damage. Personnel decisions must prioritize workplace culture over short-term profits. Protecting vulnerable employees justifies temporary business disruption. Judge asks about progressive discipline policy. Explain how immediate action was necessary. Jury deliberates for only 2 hours. Verdict: company liable for wrongful termination. Awarded David full $4.7 million in damages. Additional punitive damages for age and gender discrimination. Courtroom erupts as verdict is read. Feel sick watching David award his attorney. This is exactly how the legal system protects privilege. Company executives furious about verdict. Called into emergency meeting with Chief Executive Officer. Margaret, this lawsuit is destroying our company. We followed proper investigation procedures. The jury obviously didn't understand the complexities of workplace harassment. We may have to eliminate the entire human resources department to pay this judgment. Sometimes, standing up for what's right has costs. Local business journal covers the story. Tech company pays millions after firing engineer over coffee comment. Article portrays me as overzealous and David as victim. Typical media bias supporting male narratives. Story goes viral on social media. Comments section full of misogynistic attacks on feminism. Exactly what I expected from patriarchal society. Company announces elimination of human resources department. My position terminated along with 3 others. Chief Executive Officer explains cost-cutting measures necessary after lawsuit. This decision demonstrates how discrimination lawsuits harm innocent employees. Margaret, your employment is terminated effective immediately. The ironical thing is other employees lost jobs because of your judgment. Walk out with banker's box feeling vindicated. Difficult finding new human resources position. Potential employers keep asking about the lawsuit. Can you describe your decision-making process in the David situation? I identified workplace harassment and took appropriate action. The legal verdict reflects systemic bias in favor of male employees. I stand by every decision I made to protect workplace culture. Interviews consistently end without offers. 6 months later, still unemployed, savings running low and considering retail work. Former colleagues avoid me at industry networking events. David apparently found new job within weeks of lawsuit settlement. Typical example of how mediocre men always land on their feet. Women who fight discrimination get blacklisted. System rigged against anyone challenging male privilege. Receive LinkedIn message from former coworker. Hey Margaret, saw the company, got bought by larger firm. New owners brought David back as consulting engineer. He's helping rebuild the projects that got delayed. Company stock price recovered after settlement. Thought you'd want to know. Another example of how men protect each other. Reflecting on entire situation while job searching. Maybe I was too aggressive in my approach. Perhaps progressive discipline would have achieved same goals. David did seem genuinely confused during investigation. His 23-year record was actually quite good. Some of the female engineers did speak positively about him. Wait, what am I thinking? No, absolutely not going down that path. Self-doubt is internalized misogyny talking. My actions protected workplace culture from toxic masculinity. David's confusion was performative innocence. Men excel at appearing harmless while perpetuating discrimination. His positive references from women reflect Stockholm Syndrome. Legal verdict demonstrates corruption in justice system. Attend virtual feminist leadership conference. Panel discussion about workplace discrimination. Moderator asks about challenges facing women in corporate human resources. Share my story about fighting entrenched patriarchal systems. Sometimes doing what's right has personal costs. We cannot let fear of retaliation prevent us from protecting vulnerable employees. I terminated a senior male engineer for creating hostile environment. Audience member asks about specific incident details. He made coded language comment about coffee that reinforced masculine workplace norms. The debugging explanation was classic deflection technique. Impact on workplace culture superseded individual employment concerns. Panel moderator nods approvingly. Thank you for sharing your courageous leadership example. Receive few consulting inquiries from small nonprofits. Organizations looking for diversity training expertise. Finally, some recognition of my skills and principles. First consulting engagement goes well. Present workshop on identifying microaggressions. Use David's situation as case study. Seemingly innocent comments can perpetuate systemic discrimination. Year later, still doing freelance diversity consulting. Income much lower than human resources manager salary, but work feels more meaningful and aligned with values. Helping organizations identify problematic workplace behaviors. Training managers to recognize subtle forms of harassment. David incident becomes standard example in presentations. Occasionally wonder what happened to former company. Heard through networking that workplace culture improved significantly. Female engineers report feeling more supported. Company implemented comprehensive mentorship programs. New human resources team focuses on positive culture building. Obvious that my groundwork enabled these improvements. Run into former colleague at coffee shop. Oh hey, Margaret. How's the consulting going? Explain my important work fighting workplace discrimination. That's great. Hey, did you hear David got promoted to senior technical advisor? He's been mentoring our new female engineers. Actually initiated program pairing senior engineers with junior staff. Really popular with everyone. Feel frustrated hearing about David's continued success. Typical example of how problematic employees get rewarded. His mentorship program probably perpetuates paternalistic dynamics. Female engineers think they appreciate his guidance, but they're internalizing masculine approaches to technical work. Subtle forms of discrimination disguised as helpfulness. Decide to write comprehensive case study about incident. Title: Identifying Coded Language in Technical Workplace Harassment. Describe David's comment in my investigation process. Analyze how debugging terminology reinforces masculine workplace culture. Explain importance of immediate action over progressive discipline. Conclude with lessons about fighting entrenched discrimination. Submit case study to several human resources journals. Received multiple rejections citing insufficient evidence. Analysis lacks supporting documentation for harassment claims. Investigation methodology appears to violate due process standards, typical gatekeeping by male-dominated academic establishment. My lived experience as feminist leader obviously threatens their worldview. 5 years later, established successful consulting practice. Specialize in helping organizations identify subtle workplace discrimination. Regular speaking engagements at diversity conferences. David incident remains central example in presentations. Sometimes protecting workplace culture requires difficult personnel decisions. We cannot let fear of legal retaliation prevent necessary action. Occasionally Google David's name out of curiosity. Find article about engineering mentorship program he developed. Program has 89% retention rate for female engineers, significantly higher than industry average. Quote from female participant: David taught me to see debugging as creative, problem solving. His patience and encouragement made me confident in technical discussions. Clearly, these women don't recognize internalized misogyny. David's mentorship approach perpetuates paternalistic workplace dynamics. Women think they're being empowered, but actually accepting masculine frameworks. His patience and encouragement maintains hierarchical power structures. Female engineers need feminist mentorship, not technical guidance from older men. Attend 10-year conference reunion for industry professionals. Surprised to see several former co-workers in attendance. They seem initially uncomfortable when they notice me. Approach group to discuss evolution of workplace culture. I heard the company implemented comprehensive diversity programs. Obviously, my early work laid foundation for these improvements. Former colleague looks confused. Actually, Margaret, Most changes happened after the lawsuit. Leadership realized our culture needed work. David's situation was wake-up call about due process. New human resources team focuses on positive interventions rather than punitive actions. Female engineers report highest job satisfaction in company history, frustrated by their inability to recognize my contributions. My termination of David sent clear message about accountability. Fear of similar consequences motivated leadership changes. Sometimes catalyst events are necessary for systemic improvement. Colleagues exchange uncomfortable glances. Margaret, maybe we should agree to disagree on this one. Walk away feeling vindicated about long-term impact. My actions created positive change, even if others don't recognize it. David's termination forced company to examine problematic culture. Subsequent improvements prove my original assessment was correct. Workplace harassment requires immediate decisive action. Recently celebrated 10 years in diversity consulting. Built reputation as expert in identifying subtle workplace discrimination. Regular keynote speaker at feminist leadership conferences. Published several articles about fighting entrenched patriarchy in corporate settings. David case study remains most popular workshop example. Sometimes reflect on alternative approaches I could have taken. Perhaps coaching David about appropriate workplace language. Maybe progressive discipline with mandatory sensitivity training. Possibly mediated discussion about impact of coded technical language. But no, those approaches enable continued discrimination. Decisive action was necessary to protect vulnerable employees. Received LinkedIn message last week from unknown sender. Hi Margaret, I'm a junior engineer at David's new company. Wanted to thank you for your workplace advocacy. Your case study helped me identify microaggressions in our environment. Planning to file complaint about senior engineers' coffee-related comments. Your example gave me courage to speak up. Feel proud that my work continues inspiring young feminists. Next generation understands importance of holding men accountable. Workplace harassment takes many forms and requires constant vigilance. My termination of David serves as blueprint for necessary action. Sometimes fighting discrimination requires personal sacrifice. 20 years later, still consulting on workplace culture issues. David incident remains central teaching example. Presented case study to over 10,000 human resources professionals. Helped countless organizations identify problematic employee behaviors. Created systematic approach to addressing coded language harassment. Never regretted terminating David despite personal costs. Protecting workplace culture requires courage and moral clarity. Men will always resist accountability through legal intimidation. Feminist leaders must be prepared for retaliation. My actions saved countless women from hostile work environment. Occasionally wonder what David is doing now, probably still perpetuating masculine workplace norms. Men like him never truly change their fundamental attitudes. His mentorship programs likely maintain paternalistic dynamics. Female engineers think they're being helped, but actually being indoctrinated. Final reflection on entire experience. Terminating David was necessary and morally justified. Coffee comment revealed deeper patterns of workplace exclusion. Immediate action prevented escalation of discriminatory behavior. Legal verdict reflected systematic bias protecting male employees. My consulting work continues fighting similar injustices. Stand by every decision made during investigation. David's termination sent clear message about accountability. Workplace harassment requires zero-tolerance approach. Progressive discipline enables continued problematic behavior. Protecting vulnerable employees supersedes individual employment concerns. Proud to have used my position to challenge patriarchal structures. Not every human resources manager has courage to take decisive action. Feminist leadership requires willingness to accept personal costs. My example inspires other women to fight workplace discrimination. David Case demonstrates importance of immediate intervention over incremental change.